Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Every year, the Vermont House and Senate pass a few hundred resolutions. To be clear, we're not talking about bills or laws. We're talking about resolutions. They're not fancy and they generally don't make the news. Some examples: a resolution congratulating a high school sport champion, or one honoring the outstanding volunteer work of a Vermont resident. Today, we want to share with you that Across the Fence was recently honored with a House resolution recognizing our 65th anniversary and the fact that it is the longest running locally produced program in the country. Here's the Across the Fence team with the reading of the resolution.
Whereas the Across the Fence television program is a joint production of University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV, and focuses on UVM activities of community interest, including topics associated with home economics and farming.
And whereas the inaugural telecast aired on February 14th, 1955, when the television medium was still new in Vermont. And the program represents the only continuing collaboration in the country between a commercial television station and a university's extension service.
And whereas Across the Fence includes both in-studio and on-location segments and has aired nearly 17,000 episodes over 65 years.
Now, therefore, be it resolved that the General Assembly congratulates University of Vermont Extension and WCAX-TV on the 65th anniversary of the Across the Fence television program. The resolution was signed by 74 lawmakers from districts across the state. It was introduced by Representative Brian Smith of Derby. Representative Smith noted that his father, Kermit Smith, who served in the Vermont House, Senate, and as the State House Sergeant-at-Arms, remains a huge fan of Across the Fence. So our thanks to Representative Smith and to all the House members who supported the resolution. We move now from the history of this program to the history of the University of Vermont. In 1791, Vermont became the 14th state to join the Union, and that's the same year that UVM was founded, making the university the 5th oldest in New England. More than a dozen UVM buildings are on the National Register of Historic Places. During this time of year, there would normally be free historic tours of the campus, but because of the pandemic, the tours are on hold. So we reached back into our archives to find this campus tour, led by a retired university professor.
So we're standing here in front of the old mill. This is probably the best well-known building on the campus of the University of Vermont. The building we see here is the second one on this site. The first one was built in 1806 and burned down in 1824. Just by chance, the Congress had at the same time invited General Lafayette to come back over to the U.S. To help celebrate the coming 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So General Lafayette came to Burlington, as well as many other places in the country, and he laid this cornerstone of Old Mill, and you can still read it, laid by General Lafayette, June 29, 1825. This building, as I said, was the second one. It was expanded in the 1880s by a generous gift of Mr. John Howard, of a well-known family who has contributed a lot to the whole Burlington area. And you'll see his bust right in front of Old Mill. This new building, constructed in 1825, originally had a gold dome. But when it was expanded in the 1880s, down came the dome, the roof was raised, and a big tower was constructed. And that tower, of course, exists today. It's the symbol of the University of Vermont. You see it on signage and letterheads and all over the place. This is one of my favorite buildings. It's the Billings Library Building, completed in 1885. Designed by America's greatest architect at that time, Henry Hobson Richardson. Richardson studied architecture in Paris, France, and fell in love with medieval Romanesque architecture. And you can see that on the facade here. A very simple, powerful look of the Romanesque architecture with the half-circle windows as opposed to the pointed Gothic windows and so on. Coming down from the top, we see a very ornate version of the seal of the university dating back to the 1790s. And then we see two men's faces flanked by lions. Now, oral history tells us that these are portraits of the master woodcarver and the master stoneworker. And of course, they and their assistants produced the beautiful stonework on the outside, all the carving and so on, as well as the beautiful carved woodwork on the inside. In the apse of the Billings Library building, we see some beautiful examples of carving that Albert Wittekind and his assistants did. And they're connected with the rafters. If you look at the support of this roof, you'll see that there are 16 rafters coming down, and they split in two as they come down toward those beams. The part that's curving toward the center is coming to rest on some horizontal beams that are called hammerhead beams. And for those of you who have seen the first Harry Potter movie, you'll recognize this from the dining hall sequences of that movie. On the outer faces of each hammerhead beam are beautiful carved geometric leaves and flowers. Each one is different. So we've got 32 very fine carvings of decoration on these hammerhead beams. For me, the most beautiful piece of carving in this building is the fireplace and mantelpiece in this central space, all carved by Albert Wittekind and his assistants out of oak. And you see that there is the portrait of Mr. Frederick Billings on the mantelpiece. Mr. Billings was a native of Vermont, born in the area of Woodstock, and he, of course, is responsible for the very generous gift to the university that permitted the construction of this building in 1885. Probably UVM's most famous graduate was the psychologist philosopher John Dewey. Graduate of the university in 1879, born in Burlington, just a few blocks from the campus. After he obtained his PhD, he did path-breaking research essentially into how people learn, especially children, at the University of Chicago. And he discovered something that we sort of take for granted today, that is learning by doing. John Dewey passed away in 1952. He had been born before the Civil War, so his life spanned pre-Civil War America all the way up to the nuclear age. When the second Mrs. Dewey passed away in 1970, following his wishes as well, her will instructed the executor to ask the University of Vermont if it would like to be their final resting place, which of course is a great honor. And that's why today, just outside the north wall of the Ira Allen Chapel, we have the resting place of the urns of Dr. John Dewey and Mrs. Roberta Dewey, with a very simple memorial stone. The Ira Allen Chapel may be the most dominant building on UVM's campus because of the very tall bell tower. It was a gift of UVM graduate James Wilbur, who was also an amateur historian. He did a lot of work on the life of Ira Allen, published a biography of Ira Allen, donated the funds for the very fine bronze statue of Ira Allen, which is located on the green, and then in the mid-1920s donated this chapel. This building also was designed by America's probably greatest architectural firm at that time, the firm of McKim, Mead, and White. Ira Allen sort of fell into obscurity in the 19th century. The university didn't talk too much about him. Ira had a very colorful life, had a lot of property ownership difficulties. He did donate the land, most of which now constitutes the UVM green in the immediate border. However, he wandered away from Vermont and ended up his life, unfortunately, in dire circumstances in Philadelphia, and is buried in an unmarked grave. He passed away in 1814. Ira did found the University of Vermont de facto, and we'll certainly not forget his name today, in part because we've got this beautiful building reminding us of his accomplishments.
Our thanks to UVM Professor Emeritus Bill Everett, and a reminder that UVM intends to resume its historic tours next year. The history of Lake Champlain dates back nearly 500 million years. Today, it is home to 81 different species of fish and is considered one of the top bass fisheries in North America. To learn more, students at the UVM Reporting and Documentary Storytelling program spoke with a longtime fisheries biologist.
We get teased a lot about it's not really a great lake. You're right, it's a terrific lake. It is so beautiful. The Great Lakes, you can stare out across the Great Lakes and they're great. You can't see land on the other side. So it's just this big flat expanse of water. You stare out across this lake and you see the Adirondacks in the background, or the Green Mountains if you're on the other side, and you're seeing bays and islands and river mouths and sandbars. It really is an incredibly complex and just aesthetically beautiful lake. As a process of undoing the damage that's been done over the last 300, 400, 500 years, but particularly since Europeans settled the lake, the fish species that get threatened most quickly tend to be the ones that spend a long time reaching maturation. So something like a sturgeon doesn't become reproductively mature till it's 20, which means there's 20 years that we can harvest it and it never had a chance to reproduce.
We're talking about sturgeon, and they're endangered in these waters because many, many years ago they were widely slaughtered. Also, they've suffered habitat loss.
So sturgeon were deeply suppressed and endangered. Atlantic salmon were wiped out. Lake trout wiped out. And those three species in particular are now protected. We're seeing lots of juvenile sturgeon on the lake. That's incredibly hopeful for this very long-lived species. And personally, I study lake trout, and we're seeing tremendous success in the last 4 years of not just reproduction, but recruitment into the population. So more than half of the little fish we catch out there right now as part of our research are wild. And that's been 40 plus years waiting for that to happen. It's very personal. I wouldn't live anywhere else at this point because it's so beautiful to have this just right there and so accessible and so rich.
Our thanks to the students in the UVM Reporting and Documentary Storytelling program, which is part of the Center for Research on Vermont. Once again, thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.